So what I wanted to do, throughout both my presentation yesterday and the full day of conversation today, we've talked about a really broad range of activities around DEIA efforts. And I think all of them are focused on the center of this diagram of, there's two goals. One is having a more diverse and inclusive workforce within not only NAEHS, but within the broader environmental health sciences community. And then, as we were hearing with the first investigators, that that having a more diverse and inclusive workforce by the very nature of the different perspectives and backgrounds will make the research that we do stronger. And where I want to spend the next 35 minutes or so talking is, how do we integrate all of these different activities together? How do we come up with a unified approach that we are not either duplicating efforts or working at cross purposes, that we're keeping our eyes on that ultimate goal of improving both our culture and the outcome of our work. So with that, I'm going to stop talking and turn it out to council to provide advice to us on how we can really start to unify the various kinds of activities that we're engaged in. Jamie.
So, and perhaps NAEHS already does this, but just looking at what's that, a hexagon? I think the building partnerships with MSIs. So I am part of a U54 grant out of NCI that essentially does that. It's a partnership between a comprehensive cancer center and a minority serving institution with a focus on health disparities in cancer. But it really has been, I think we've had this partnership for 20 years now, and it really has built a lot of capability at my place, as in we had no cancer research, and now we have American Cancer Society Center at our place. And then it's just given opportunity for those shared resources that were talked about earlier, where a place like Northern Arizona University doesn't have some of those things that we can utilize from the University of Arizona's Cancer Center and that kind of thing. So I don't know if there are funding mechanisms for that already, but I guess I've seen myself that it's been really a great way to build things at those centers. And then I guess to go with that, one of the aspects of our partnership is trainees, and many of those trainees come from our place to start with, because there are more Native American students, for example, at our place that are engaged in undergraduate research. So, and then, seeing them maybe go to the University of Arizona, maybe go to other places, but, to see them move through the training career path type of thing. So just something that I've seen, I think it does work myself.
I guess it's really interesting to continue to learn the culture here, and of course how it differs with mine across the pond at EPA. And in the discussion of the grants yesterday and the the balance of independently unsolicited and solicited grants, it seems like there may be some room to press harder on your solicited grants to reach some of your goals. And at least one of the, I think, Trevor, in your presentation, you did, you referenced the executive orders, and these executive orders like 12898, which was the original 1994 executive order on environmental justice that was just reinforced by 14096, because this is the world I live in. which actually did reinforce that, actually calls for the inclusion of diverse groups in research, and particularly in biomedical research. And the request back from 1994 was that groups be represented, fully represented in research in ways that they had not been, and in some ways still are not. And so it seems like there are ways that paying attention to the broadening definitions of diversity. So not only do you want to include ways to include people who are differently abled in the workplace, but incorporating that into groups who you're studying, who are part of your study groups. And for community engagement, requiring the grantees to engage with the community to the extent that you can write that in, or requiring or asking for, or giving premium, giving weight to applications that include a community partner, giving weight to grants that include an MSI partner, seem to be things that you may already be doing. It is something that we're writing into our grants. I could cue Daryl to talk about some of our recent solicitations if you want. But it is a way to be directive. And if you want to change that balance slightly in terms of unsolicited and solicited, so that that may be a way to drive it.
Thank you, Andrew. Trevor, I think you're next.
Yeah, I think I made this point yesterday, but I think it's worth reinforcing. At the center of this diagram, you have more diverse and inclusive workforce. But from my perspective, when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion issues, it gets at more than just the workforce. So you want a diverse workforce for sure, and in terms of who will actually do the research. But building on what you just heard, there's also a need to actually make sure we have diversity in research participants. You also need to have diversity when it comes to where we actually do the research. Not only partnerships with HBMCU and MSIs, but also partnerships with the community. So I think the diagram you have there doesn't really bring a lens on everything we want to do.
Andrish.
Thanks. It's been mentioned a few times over a number of these presentations, but I'd just like to go back to the point that there's going to be an increased need and dependence upon mentors for different parts of some of these programs. And I just want to express that if there's going to be increased demands of the mentors, there should be some kind of reward system for those mentors put in place. That otherwise they're going to be overused and they're going to get burned out. So just a small point, but I think something that's important to consider.
Yeah, I know that is something that we have talked about internally, is the burnout of the people that are stepping up to do a lot of this work. Yeah, Fred is reminding me of the COSWAD, the chief, Marie Bernard, has diversity mentorship awards that her office issues to help support that as well. Gary.
Yeah, I think we just talked before about the community advisory board sort of idea, and thinking about these sort of major issues that we want to follow as council members. In addition to hearing from that sort of view, I think every council meeting there should be a report on these efforts around the diversity piece. There's different parts of it, but it's just like, I'd like to hear the progress being made by the Institute in these areas, using your hexagonal slide, whatever that is, and just saying where that progress has been made. I think it should be a routine part in council discussions.
Yeah, and I think that actually touches on one of the questions I was going to poke on, which is one of those hexagons is evaluation. You know, some of the things we're going to do are going to be more effective than others. And you know, how do we, and I'm looking at Christy, who's smiling, you know, how do we tie quantitative metrics to the things that we're doing so that we know what is being more successful than other things that we're doing? Irvine, you're next in line. I don't want to put you on the spot to answer that, but being a quantitative scientist, maybe you have some ideas for us.
Well, I think we heard about several rubrics that are out there, and maybe I'm really looking forward to seeing those. And Daryl has one, and I forgot who else had a rubric for evaluation of some programs. So I'll skip back to what I originally was going to talk about, and that is that, you know, starting with the center, which is that we want a diverse workforce, but we want we want the best science. And I think, you know, one of the most serious aspects about environmental health is that it's part of the environment is part of the reason for health disparities that are central to public health. And to adequately address those disparities, you know, all of the things that were presented, and Trevor just went kind of through one of the menus of that is the community engagement, who are engaging into as participants into the study, who's conducting the studies, but really it's the topic area of the disparities and what we can contribute to public health, to environmental public health, that for which those diverse perspectives and life experiences and lived experiences are central to being able to design and conduct the best studies. So I think it really, you know, those things, it's kind of circular, and each of those will have to reinforce the other. And the best science does require multiple lenses to the problem. And we heard a lot from the intramural about I forgot what the R was, but the equity lens, the environmental equity lens. So that those lenses of from the perspectives of the participants, the perspectives of the communities that are suffering, and the perspective of this much more attuned workforce that can come from the efforts of the training and the workforce development, will bring the best science, I think, to bear.
Yeah, I really appreciate those comments. Thank you. Daryl, I think you're next in the queue.
Let's see here now, following up on what Andrew was discussing relative to communities, community representation, community boards, and best science. And so the EPA seems to be a little bit ahead on just sort of grasping with the problem and realization that interfacing with communities and the co-planning that's necessary, right, when you're engaged with them, right, co-planning towards sort of getting at some of these policy boundaries that disproportionately impact vulnerable communities, right? So they have an EJ, Environmental Justice Program, you know, it's heads up. So great job, Andrew. Thanks for the money. But to that point, they've instituted something that I think is seminal to their success in this area, and that is it is obligatory in most of these STAR grants now to have in there a low income, disenfranchised communities benefits cost analysis to guide policy, right? And the community takes part in that. This is a co-planning scenario. We call ours PERC, but that lets you see through the lens that Irva was just talking about, a different perspective, and it actually guides you to the policies that your intervention is going to, the policy boundaries, that's what we're doing, right? So we're going from county to county. They've even extended, so the long story short is that makes a huge difference in the interfacing with the community and the impact, because you're directly going to impact some part, because they don't fund them unless you have all of that articulated in the grant. So it's all about community, and we don't have to call it community advisory board. It can just be a community board member, right? That sits with us. Thanks.
Well, and I think I'll push back a little bit, and I think we do a lot. In our P30 centers, in our P42 centers, we have the PEPH, we have our research to action program. All of which are they may not be as formalized in the policy implication. Maybe that's where there can be a lesson learned. But I think we have done a lot to embed this in the research that we are doing as an institute, and in our largest and most visible programs, over the last really several decades. Since Ken was the director, I think that's been a priority for us. So. Just pushing back a little bit. Janie.
Sort of, I guess, piggybacking off of that for a moment, is that in order to do the community engaged, you have to have a lot of meetings beforehand, a lot of listening sessions, that type of thing. And so we have a center grant from the Minority Health and Health Disparities, and they had like these community partnership building small grants, but enough to travel. And that's how I ended up, after a few years really of building this partnership with a small tribe in the corner of Arizona, which then we were able to write an EPA grant, and they were, they co-sponsored it. So I think there is sometimes funding out of centers to do that, but there are not that many centers around the country. And so I don't know if there's a mechanism to provide that just partnership building. It's not a ton of money, but for most communities, this Zoom thing doesn't work. I mean, you're going to have to physically go there, and physically going there also helps you to see the landscape and what the issues are. So that might be something to build those partnerships better. And then the other comment I was just going to make in talking about all these diverse viewpoints and trying to bring in diverse, not just people from different experiences, but disciplines and all that kind of stuff. You could adopt it, but that's really an indigenous way of thinking. As a trained scientist, we go to the reduction thing, we want to hold on to all the parameters. We want to really look at it from one lens and say, oh, but this can apply to all this complex problems, which the indigenous folks say, this is a complex problem. Let's look at everything, including spirituality and mental, the mental health and all this kinds of stuff. And I feel like in this meeting, I hear NAEHS moving toward that more indigenous viewpoint. So anyway, it's exciting for me because I have been frustrated sometimes with colleagues who say, well, don't look at real samples. let's make our own synthetic water or our own synthetic soil so we can control the parameters, which I understand for basic science, but that starts to go apples and oranges with what's actually happening in the communities. So, so anyway, it's kind of exciting to see. Let's look at things on a higher level and try and understand these complex problems.
So we do still have time. We have about 15 minutes remaining in our day. If there are other comments or questions? Gary.
So yesterday you had commented on some of the budget tightening that may be coming up here, and thinking about, I think it's important to prioritize many of these issues around the diversity, equity, and inclusion part. Some of them can be relatively inexpensive, and I think we should look at the things that are cost neutral or maybe small investments that we can do, and do those right away. Don't let the excuse saying, oh, well, the budget's tight, so we can't start that thing. Because I think a lot of these things just need to be integrated more into the entire culture of the Institute, and really working on pressing those things forward, and not letting the sort of budget challenges be an impediment.
And Rick, I see your hand, so I'm assuming you would like to respond to that.
Yeah, so Gary, I think you raised a really good point, a very important point. But I do want to remind everyone, we will have some challenges next year, but we still have over $1 billion to work with. So it's really about prioritizing, just making sure that these issues that we're talking about today, continue to be high priority items along with other things. I think that's what you're saying. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. Like there's no reason we can do a lot of these things with the existing budget.
Correct. Yep. So just let me assure you that at least we will keep those things in mind. But we still have money, and we just have to be thoughtful in how we dispense the money and the way that we get the most from every expenditure we make.
And Karen.
Yeah, I just want to state the obvious here. In a perfect world, what we would love is that there's just a culture change, and then we wouldn't have to worry about putting this priority in place and paying for this and putting this person here and that person there and having a diversity officer, because we'd all just blend into one group, right? Okay, that's not obviously going to happen overnight, but I think to Gary's point, there are many things that can be done that don't require a large amount of money. And also to Trevor Penning's point, bringing people in over the summer, we have the same issue. We want to bring in students to do research from the high school level, the college level, and they have to essentially end up volunteering. And it would not take a lot of money to pay them a stipend that is, competitive with them. Like Trevor said, they'll just go out and get a job or do something else rather than bringing them into the scientific community. So there are some things that are low-hanging fruit that don't cost much. But then to Trevor Archer's point and what he's doing, I think there are a lot of things that don't really, it costs time, but it doesn't cost, it's not like an initiative, a funding initiative, is to just have a lot of interactions on a regular basis, doing things that educate people about DEI issues and so on, that eventually then it just becomes a cultural change, because that's what we really need in the end, right? But anyway, just stating the obvious.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mike Humble. I'm the program administrator, and I oversee both our fellowship program and our R25 summer research programs. And just wanted to respond, Trevor mentioned earlier, the acknowledgement that we do need to give these undergraduates and high school students a competitive salary. We did have a limit for a long time on the R25 programs, like $10 an hour is an NIH limit. We've now since gotten rid of that, because we do realize that the students can make $15 an hour at a fast food place. And so to be able to effectively compete for those types of things, we have removed those types of limits on the salaries and stipends. Just thought I'd mention that. Thanks.
Thanks, Mike. So, yes, you can pay them a competitive wage, and we'll find the money somewhere. These are not large programs, so I think we can absorb that. And if there are no more comments, I will call Rick back to the podium to give us some closing words, and then Trevor can bang the gavel.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for a really engaging council. In fact, I'll call it the best yet. So they keep getting better. It seems every time we get together. I look forward to a time when actually I'll be there also in person, and we can all be together. I was talking to a few of you before I left at noon today, and I think we were all commenting on how it's just so different when we're actually physically in the room together. So I'm looking forward to doing that with all of you, and thank you for all of your time, your engagement, your thoughtful contributions. And I specifically want to make sure that, sorry, my jaw is not, I got ice on it, now it's frozen. I want to especially thank Karen for that, and all members of your working group for a spectacular report. So this is very, very helpful. So thanks everyone, and let me turn this over to Dr. Archer, who has the gap, and will formally end the meeting.
Thank you, Rick. And again, I'll also add my thanks to the council for for the hard work that you did, both in the preparation of the working group, but also the work of the council itself. And I hope we've been able to impress upon you the primacy and importance with which we have placed on DIA, and that it's really, as Karen said, our attempt to embed it in our culture to make sure that we can really do the very, very best environmental health science research that we can. And so with that, I'll thank you again, and I guess we're formally closed.